afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Baylor Rice. I am one of the pharmacists and owner here at South River, so welcome. Glad you could join us today. Today's presentation is on ADHD and brain optimization. So we'll be going over quite a bit today on how we can optimize brain health and hit that. Everyone is or should be muted, so hopefully you'll maintain muting during today's presentation as we are recording. So if you do have a question, please use our chat feature at the bottom. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with today's presentation. Little disclaimer, certainly I don't send things to the FDA for their perusal prior to our webinars. So this is certainly from us here at South River. So a little bit about us for anyone new with us this afternoon, or for those that are watching via YouTube. My wife and I opened South River Compounding Pharmacy back in May of 1998, really with the goal of working with each individual one at a time, really to optimize health. And we were the first modern day compounding only pharmacy in the state of Virginia, as well as the first natural medicine pharmacy in Virginia. So we do specialize in vitamins, minerals, nutrients, herbals, etc. So we do a lot of consulting, working one-on-one with patients, trying to optimize and figure out the best way to come at whatever it is you need help with. So certainly one thing we'll be talking about today is both saliva as well as urine testing. So we've got a whole bunch of different ways of assessing health and looking at things a little bit differently than traditional medicine, if you will. So with that, and certainly anything we do in the lab that does require prescription. So that is the piece with working with the patient, with the practitioner, whether it's your primary care, MD, PA, nurse practitioner. Again, anything we do in the lab does require prescription. So let's start just a little bit with some of the symptoms of ADHD. Certainly not being able to pay attention to details or sustaining attention levels, not seeming to listen, difficulty following through or completing a task, difficulty with organization, dislikes task requiring attention, certainly losing things, easily distracted, hyperactive, restless, squirmy, talking, interrupting, kind of tends to looks like they're thinking or acting without thinking. Certainly hyperactivity, leaving the seat, fidgeting, can't play quietly, bursting out, impulsive behavior. Certainly some comorbid symptoms that go along or can go along with this. Certainly post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, separation anxiety, learning disabilities, both reading, writing, comprehension, and then, of course, PANDAS. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about neuroinflammation, certainly in the beginning here. Inflammation in the brain, right? That's what's affecting brain function, and chronic inflammation can certainly end up being a big problem, and that can lead to neuronal dysfunction, neuronal injury, and certainly eventually neuronal death. Certainly there are many different causes of neuroinflammation, from pathogens, whether it's fungal, bacterial, viral, protozoal, toxins, the environment, the foods we eat. Certainly genetics can play a role with that as well. Traumatic brain injuries from sports and military, motor vehicle accidents, violence, immune/autoimmune dysfunction and conditions, as well as kind of the aging process in general, with also degradation as really a result of chronic stress and post-traumatic stress. So certainly that is an issue. Now, when we think about some of the traditional treatments for ADHD, certainly we look at, when mood's involved, there can be tricyclics, bupropion, a whole host of different other medications. Certainly with the hyperactivity component, stimulants. If it's just inattention, certainly Strattera. With OCD, obsessive compulsive disease disorder, outburst, attention, communication disorders, certainly looking at things like guanfacine, clonidine, etc. So a whole host of variety of medications for that. So our focus today is going to be more what we can do from the natural aspect to try to help support the system. So certainly with that being said, what we look at are neurotransmitters. So those are chemical messengers that help regulate the physical, emotional processes within the system that can affect the stress response, cognitive function, emotions, energies, cravings, pain, etc. So by looking at these things, the neurotransmitters really are serving as the functioning primary piece in the central nervous system between the brain and the body's glands, organs, muscles. So they're released from the neurons and they have to travel across this small space called the synapse in order to reach the receptors and really target cells. So there really kind of is this balance between the neurotransmitters and the target tissues for overall health and well-being. So some of the things that neurotransmitters can impact. Certainly, we use this testing a lot for anxiety and depression, energy, fatigue, insomnia, but certainly also addiction, weight loss, cravings, impulse control, and of course, today's focus on the inability to focus, right? Or mental clarity, memory, certainly chronic pain, headaches, IBS. So a whole lot of different disease states neurotransmitters can really kind of shed some light on to the situation. So some of the key neurotransmitters, certainly norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. Now, those things, certainly you can see some things fall more in one area than another. Certainly dopamine, we think of more of the pleasure, reward, motivation, our drive. Serotonin, mood, obsessions, compulsions, memory. Norepinephrine, more alertness, concentration, energy. And of course, there's a lot of overlap, right? So, attention, kind of both more dopamine and norepinephrine, appetite, aggression, sex drive, more serotonin, dopamine, and then the mood kind of hit a little bit cognitive as well as cognitive function, a little bit from all of it, right? Anxiety, impulses, irritability, kind of both in the basket of norepinephrine and serotonin. So I wanted to share this with you so that you understand it's not just a singular thing you can point out and say, okay, well, gee, here, serotonin's the answer to my issues, or dopamine, the norepinephrine. Most of the time it is kind of a blend of all of it, or balance, if you will. Some of the different signs and symptoms caused by imbalances certainly stem beyond just mood and behavioral, but sleep, of course, concentration, right? Fatigue, IBS, mental clarity, pain, sweating, dizziness, heart palpitations, attention deficits, as well as addiction. So certainly we can test these neurotransmitters. That is a urine test. So it is a take-home kit. You take home, pee in a cup, package it up, send it off. There's already a shipping label and everything along with it. So of course, some of the key ones that we look at: serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, GABA, glutamate, PEA. Right. Now, when we look at these pathways, this is a very busy slide, and I'm not going to make you an expert in this, certainly not in less than an hour today. But really, what I want to do is give you the appreciation for this is certainly a very complex pathway. So there's pathways from one thing to the other affecting these neurotransmitters, right? We can see serotonin, norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, glutamate, GABA. But there's pathways here that are impacted by enzymes as well as impacted by nutrients. So it's not only one of those things that we want to just focus on the individual neurotransmitters, but also what we'll do is look at and think about how we get one thing to another to push a pathway. So that goes back to certainly amino acids, goes back to cofactors, goes to looking at the adrenal glands and helping with adaptogenic herbs, helping to support the system. So some of the precursors that we'll use, certainly tryptophan, tyrosine, GABA, taurine, 5-hydroxytryptophan, glutamine, L-theanine, as well as phenylalanine. So basic amino acids, typically most amino acids are ideally best about 30 minutes away from food. So either 30 minutes before you eat, or if you do it, take them after, generally you want to wait about 60 minutes after eating. Some of the different cofactors, a lot of them certainly are B vitamins, vitamin C. There's a lot of things that we'll use that are, really should be inherent in our everyday regimen, if you will, that are going to help to transport and metabolize one thing into another. And certainly when those metabolic pathways are slow and not working well, that's going to affect it. Certainly, if we're not taking norepinephrine to epinephrine properly, then that's going to lead to a decrease in epinephrine, increase in norepinephrine. It's going to throw the system off. Some of the different adaptogenic herbs that we'll use to kind of help balance and support the adrenal glands, certainly rhodiola, licorice, ginseng extracts, ginkgo, ashwagandha, astragalus, schizandra. So really, a lot of times we'll use kind of a combination of these herbs. One of my favorite formulas that we'll use very often, we just kind of called it what it is, called cortisol support. So that does have a combination of adaptogenic herbs in it. Typically it is one twice a day, breakfast, lunch. Works very well to just really kind of balance and smooth the system out, help and support the adrenals. Certainly right now with COVID still kind of going and peaking, but yet again, with this Delta variant, stress is certainly very high, especially right now. Right now, live-wise, we're doing this beginning of September, so some kids are already back in school. Certainly college kids are already there. Some universities have already kind of shut down and gone to remote learning already. And then a lot of the public schools are starting first of next week after the holiday weekend. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Most of the schools are going back in person, but how quickly are things going to be shut down and gone back to remote learning? Time will tell, right? So Nervine herbs are those that are also going to help support and kind of balance, help with that stress, insomnia, depression, certainly valerian, passion flower, chamomile, lemon balm, oats, kava, lavender, California poppy, as well as hops. So a variety of different herbs we can use to kind of serve as a tonic and balancing to the nervous system. Methylation is responsible for a lot of different pathways in the system. Typically, we're going to use the methylated form of folic as well as B12 because about half the population has what's called an MTHFR deficiency. So that is a genetic SNP in the system to where you're not metabolizing that B12 and folic acid properly. Where we see a lot of that is neurological as well as cardiovascular disease. So it does typically increase those risk for those disease states. Then we'll also use the more absorbable form, B6 pyridoxal 5-phosphate. We can use something called SAMe, acetylmethionine, to further help support this methylation process. Yes, very complex. There's over about 350 pathways that's kind of pushing and impacting. So a lot of biochemistry, very important for helping support the neurotransmitters, right? So you'll see here, certainly dopamine, serotonin in there, right? It's helping to support this whole system. So again, we use methylcobalamin as the more absorbable form of B12. And of course, why? Cognitive function, neuroprotection. So both for ADD, ADHD, certainly Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, the list goes on. L-theanine. L-theanine is certainly one of my favorite amino acids. It is derived from the green tea leaf. There's no caffeine in it, so it's not going to make you hyper. It's not going to stimulate you, if you will, but it does a really good job of balancing the norepinephrine, epinephrine. It also is going to help serve as a GABA agonist. It's going to help as an antagonist on the glutamate receptors, and it's going to modulate the dopamine level. So it really balances out the whole neurochemistry panel, if you will. Typical dose, most of the time, we're going to do 200 milligrams at a time, and I'll go up to 4 times a day, typically sometimes 5 times a day for my patients. Works very well. It does have a short half-life, so that's why typically we're going to need to dose it multiple times during the day. But, if I kind of give you a visual on this, kind of helps take the weight off the shoulders, right? So then we can take that and get better focus on the task at hand. Very calming effect. So, non-drowsy, non-goofy, non-loopy, non-addictive. So some things I like very much. I'll use it for young kids down to 3 years old up to granny at 103. So very well tolerated and works well. Vitamin D. Vitamin D, it's one of those things right now, especially with COVID, we ought to be on anyway. The data on vitamin D helping to support the immune system against COVID. So typically as a baseline, we're using 5,000 IUs a day for our, teenagers and adult patients. Certainly I'll go higher than that if I have a lab, but if I don't have a lab, I'm going to utilize 5,000 as a baseline. But what do you see? You also see it helping with supporting the pathways of the neurochemistry. So again, it should be in your baseline anyway, but even more important when we're thinking about neurochemistry. Fish oils, omega-3 essential fatty acids. Again, it's one of our baseline supplements. EPA, great for anti-inflammatory issues. DHA, really, it's going to help one side of the brain talk to the other. So it's going to help with the permeability of that cell wall membrane. So fish oils, huge, helping. Again, should be as a baseline. When we're working with a patient that's having an issue with brain function, we're going to pop those levels up even higher. Probiotic, a lot of people have heard of that gut-brain connection. Absolutely. The majority of the neurotransmitters are produced in the gut. So if the gut is off, that's going to be impacting the brain. So definitely we want to be thinking about the gastrointestinal system. So are we having gas, bloating? Are we having reflux? Are you pooping every day? Are you pooping multiple times a day? Ideally, you should be having a bowel movement 18 hours after you eat. So if you're eating 3 times a day, ideally you should be pooping 3 times a day. So if not, if the gut is off, we need to be thinking about the gut. Now, with that being said, 40% of the time I'll see the gut still being an issue with 0 gastrointestinal symptoms. So just because you may not be having any symptoms doesn't mean that we can ignore the gastrointestinal system. And certainly we need to think about previous antibiotic usage. So certainly if we've had high antibiotic usage for a child, at earlier age, we need to be thinking about looking at what's going on with the gut and supporting the gastrointestinal system. Some symptoms of imbalanced serotonin, certainly racing thoughts, emotional numbness, higher emotional swings, right? Also depression, compulsive thoughts, thoughts of suicide. Certainly physically, we can see fluctuations of body temperatures, aches, pains, cramps, bowel bladder issues. So Those are some things we think about with regard to serotonin. And then, of course, brain function, mood function, right? That's, again, why we're kind of pulling that piece in today. Serotonin also works as a neurotransmitter in the brain and helps and have been affected with regard to celiac disease. So again, going back to the gut. Certainly, there are natural ways that you can affect serotonin. Um, Certainly, positive mood induction, light therapy, so using a full spectrum or blue wave light, exercise is going to help. And then, of course, nutritional supplements. So, using tryptophan, 5-hydroxytryptophan, acetylsomethionine, those are some of the things that we'll use to kind of help push serotonin. Dopamine, again, kind of the reward center, pleasure center, if you will, drive, motivation. So if we've got somebody with low motivation, I'd anticipate that dopamine to be on the lower level. Sleep, mood, and of course, attention, learning, right? Which is why you guys are watching this today. Dopamine deficit, more Parkinsonian type symptoms. Serotonin deficit, more OCD type symptoms. Okay. Excess dopamine, certainly we can see paranoia. Norepinephrine, epinephrine, so more that fright, flight piece, right? So regulates that, controls attention, as well as controls arousal. It's regulating the heart rate, blood pressure, glucose levels, as well as our energy stores. The synthesis of norepinephrine certainly released by stress events. So right now, certainly a very high stress. So we're on that constant flight, fright aspect, right? So that's going to affect our adrenals. That's going to affect the feedback loop, releasing more stress hormones, cortisol and DHEA, further throwing the system out of balance. Certainly epinephrine also going there, can be used as some folks affecting neurons in the brain, but really mostly we see it more in the periphery, affecting that. So there's that very much that balance of norepinephrine, epinephrine. It's going to further regulate our carbohydrate as well as our lipid metabolism, right? So it's going to affect our exercise, our cold intolerance, low blood sugar issues, high blood pressure, as well as high glycogen storage as well. So there's certainly those adrenaline junkies out there, right? That constantly kind of have to be on the edge of things. But low levels of norepinephrine and epinephrine certainly can lead to poor attention, memory, decreased concentration, reduced socialization, loss of alertness, brain fog, depression, pain, lack of arousal and interest, as well. Excess levels of norepinephrine and epinephrine can lead to irritability, anxiety, agitation, sleeplessness, inability to relax, lack of focus, lots of cognitive issues, right? Restlessness, hypertension, tremors, cold hands. Glutamate, that's more the excitatory neurotransmitter. High glutamate, we're going to see more depression, fatigue, brain fog, addiction, dependency, slow learning. Low glutamate, anxiety, insomnia, ADHD, poor concentration, seizures. We'll see it with ALS, MS, autism, Alzheimer's. And again, how do you differentiate just by symptoms? Brain fog, poor concentration, where are you? That's why looking at the levels really gives us an idea of where we are. It gives us a starting point. So are we dealing with high levels? Are we dealing with low levels? Also, glutamate, MSG, can increase glutamate levels. So you can see MSG is often found in bouillon and broths. You can also find in cornstarch, corn syrup, and Lord knows when you start reading labels, corn syrup's in everything, right? Yeast extracts, hydrolyzed things, barley malt extracts, rice syrup, brown rice syrup, soy sauce, seasonings, gelatins. So when you start reading and thinking about, there's a lot of things that are increasing that MSG, therefore increasing the glutamate, increasing that excitatory neurotransmitters. GABA, that's the more inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, relaxing, calming. It's synthesized from glutamate as well as pyridoxal 5-phosphate. So GABA A is a predominant receptor. It's utilized by neuroprotective drugs like benzodiazepines are hitting that aspect, often used to help treat anxiety, seizures, as well as sedative and muscle relaxant. GABA imbalances. So when we think low GABA, typically we're going to see more panic, anxiety, depression, alcoholism, as well as bipolar disorders. Elevated GABA, we tend to see more drowsiness, lack of alertness, difficulty concentrating, diminished memory, dampened mood, decreased cognitive processing. Certainly, GABA levels may become elevated as a compensatory mechanism when excitatory neurotransmitters are high. So yes, this is complex, and that's why it's good to see, what do we have in the buckets, right? Where are they? So if we're thinking norepi, epi, dopamine, GABA, serotonin, is norepi high? That's low. Where are these levels, right? Versus just, well, let's just, throw somebody on a stimulant because we've got decreased focusing. Well, it's way more complex than that, and it's way more complex. Then, all right, well, let's try some Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, etc. And that's why so many people see side effects with those drugs. Line up 20 different people, give them all the same medication for a similar symptom, and you're going to get 20 different responses. And why? Because everybody's levels are a little bit different, and maybe that wasn't the best. Maybe they are already higher serotonin, so giving them a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor is only going to drive that up higher, and that wasn't the issue. Right? So when you start thinking about it that way, hopefully it starts making sense. GABA impact, when sufficient or therapeutic, it's going to help with alcohol withdrawal, help with anxiety. We'll use it a lot of time with some schizophrenics, helping with blood pressure, suppressing appetite, PMS type symptoms, and it can further help with depression. Side note, certainly exercise can increase GABA, but yoga especially is going to be excellent for helping to balance GABA levels. Okay, this is kind of what one of the kits look like. So for the urine piece, peeing on the cup and then taking part of that and putting it in the tube. If we're looking at cortisol and or DHEA, that's done with salivary levels. So there'll be a tube for looking at the cortisol. Typically, we look at cortisol with saliva versus blood. Why saliva? You want to look at cortisol 4 times during the day. So before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, before bedtime. So there should be what's called a diurnal pattern with that cortisol. So looking at it multiple times so we can plot it. Are you way down here? Are you way up here? Are you starting off here and then shooting up high? I see it all over the map, right? So the only way to really get that is, let's see where that is. So if stress, anxiety is high, sleep is really off, then we really need to think about, okay, let's also look at those cortisol levels. So, do I look at them as much for the pediatrics? No, more, 20 plus year olds, especially, 30, 40, 50 on up, right? Those of us that are burning the candle at both ends, we've got, work responsibilities, home responsibilities with our kids, with our spouse, with our parents, we've got a lot going on. So there's certainly forms that are filled out. There's a requisition form. There's patient information you'll put on that. Certainly the staff does a great job. They'll kind of walk you through how to do that. Do we look at just the neurotransmitters, or do we also look at the adrenal piece? Certainly, if you're postmenopausal or menopausal, or for us guys, andropausal, kind of in that hormone realm, then we may want to also think about looking at the sex hormones, because that's going to interplay. Not taking time on that piece today. Certainly you can go to our website and click into our YouTube channel. We do have webinars on sex hormones for both men and women. So it is balance of hormones, and there is a big interplay with all of it. So this is kind of a sample report here of what it'll show you. So, ideally what you want to see are things kind of through here, right? So in this aspect, glutamate's not too bad. The ratio of norepinephrine is not too bad, but you can see the norepinephrine and epinephrine are both way cranked up. Dopamine, GABA, as well as serotonin are on the low side. So there's definitely some things that we can do to try to help pull these here, as well as pull the epinephrine and glutamate down some. Cannabinoids, CBD. Again, we've got a webinar that's an hour long just on cannabinoids, but I did want to take a moment and just kind of review this just a little bit, because cannabinoids can make a great difference in brain function, can help support not only the endocannabinoid system, but further pull some relief off the adrenals, helping with the stress piece, helping with focus, helping with sleep. So it really does do quite a bit. Typically, if we're talking about pediatric patients, certainly with cannabinoids, typically the THC level has to be less than 0.3% to be legal. So it's not psychoactive. It's not going to make you high, not going to get you high. We've got, a bunch of cannabinoid receptors from head to toe. That's really why it hits so many different aspects within the system. NIH has said it may have therapeutic effect and potential in almost all diseases affecting humans, which is huge. Raphael Mechoulam is the chemist who's identified the endocannabinoid system. Really, there's 220 different systems in the body that cannabinoids are hitting. So it's just too many to list. World Health Organization's made several statements on CBD, safe and well tolerated in humans, not associated with negative public health effects, and not associated with abuse potential. So I'm not talking about marijuana. I'm not talking about getting high or getting stoned. I'm talking about cannabinoids to support our endogenous system to bring balance. So when you look at that here, there's about 115 different cannabinoids. Here are just a few of them. So again, hitting inflammation. We spoke of inflammation already with regard to brain function. Certainly, if there's bacterial component to it, immune, again, inflammation, right? Hitting a lot of different areas. So hitting with brain functions, certainly depression, anxiety, etc. Certainly, quality is a big key thing with not only supplements in general, but also CBD. And CBD follows what we found with supplements in general. Typically, we found for years about 80% of the supplements in the market, as well as we see the same with CBD, are not what they say they are on the label. So we deal with companies that are registered with the FDA, following good manufacturing practices, doing dissolution, disintegration, mass spectroscopy. So it is exactly what we want it to be, so we can properly assess a patient after an appropriate amount of time. Right. The trick with CBD is typically we start low and go slow and slowly start titrating that dosage up. So whether we use tinctures, gummies, soft gels, it doesn't matter, whatever's easiest, right? Typically, tinctures are going to be the most cost-effective per milligram, but typically we're going to want to increase that dosage up until you achieve your desired result. Or if you get daytime sleepiness, that's when we want to try to back off the dosage. So baseline supplements, what we want to be thinking about. Our phytonutrient multi is a food-based multi. It does have methylated Bs in it. Why? As I stated earlier, half the population has an MTHFR deficiency. So we go ahead, I go ahead and put everybody on methylated Bs. Rich in antioxidants, has the Bs in there to support that biochemistry, supporting the metabolism of the neurochemistry. And again, during times of stress, we're going to chew up the Bs a little bit faster. So it's so very important. Fish oils, omega-3 essential fatty acids. So whether you do that with a soft gel, if it's, well, I can't swallow a soft gel, or certainly with pediatrics, we've got a very extremely clean fish oil liquid. Does it have a slight fish taste? Very slight. Refrigerate it. Certainly that helps. But it's 2,400 milligrams of EPA and DHA per teaspoon. So you can take it straight, or you can mix it in with a little beverage, and that's fine as well. As I mentioned earlier, both for immune function as well as helping with the neurochemistry and the pathways, vitamin D3. Baseline is 5,000 IUs for most patients, certainly pediatrics. I'm going to back off of that, depending on weight and size. But for, your standard adults, 120 pounds higher, I'm going to go 5,000 IUs a day. If I have a lab and we know that it's not too ideal, I will go higher. The normal for most labs is 30 to 100. Ideal is 60 to 80. So I can't tell you how many times a week I'll see somebody coming in, their level's 32 or even 40. And, hey, I'm normal. Well, 32, we can triple that and we'll still be less than 100, right? 40, we could double that. That's still not optimal. So especially when we're working with, mood, concentration, bone density, vitamin D is going to help drive the calcium into the bones. For those that are older, right, 35 and above, especially, let's bring in the K2, that's going to help keep it into the bones and help with the absorption of the calcium as well as the vitamin D, and help keep it out of the artery, so helping to decrease atherosclerosis. Boxley's organic CBD, organic, it is an organic CBD, very clean, lots of different options, whether it's tinctures, soft gels, or gummies. And again, typically I'm going to start with about 15 milligrams or so a day and increase that up as tolerated. Certainly other supplements, and this could be pages long, the multi is going to have some methylation support in there. Sometimes we'll go higher. Certainly we can bring in memory support that has a variety of different herbals in it to help support brain function. CoQ10, one of the primary nutrients for mitochondrial function. Nerve2 activator helps with going against brain inflammation. If we've got inflammation overall, certainly for our older folks, maybe we've got some other inflammation in the system, whether it's cardiovascular inflammation or joint inflammation, and then we've also got some brain inflammation. Then we'll hit it with overall total body inflammation with going after either Ultra Inflammax or Iron Flavonoid Plus that has a hops extract in it, has ginger, curcumin in it, and does a very nice job of decreasing inflammation. Stress, I mentioned L-theanine, a great amino acid helping to balance all of the neurochemistry. Works very well. Typically, we'll go one capsule, which is 200 milligrams, up to 4 times a day. We also have it as 100 milligrams or 200 milligram capsules. So certainly pediatrics, I'll gravitate towards the 100 milligrams. Adults, the 200 milligram capsule. Cortisol support is a fantastic Ayurvedic adaptogenic adrenal formula. So typically one at breakfast, one at lunch. We'll also use an adrenal formulation called adrenal support. So if that energy is more in the tank, then I'll kind of go towards that formula. Tranquil, we'll use that formula more if there's kind of some stress and worry on board. Typically I won't use all 3 of those at one time. I'll use these individually, and then will I add some L-theanine to it? Absolutely. Sleep, Ideally, we want 8 hours of straight sleep. Absolutely imperative. That's when we're going to kind of repair and hit the reset button on the adrenals. Melatonin secreted by the pineal gland, so that can affect that circadian rhythm with regards to our sleep cycle. We do have a CBD formula that has 25 milligrams of cannabinoids, so that's five of the cannabinoids plus terpenes plus an additional 3 milligrams of CBN and 3 milligrams of melatonin. CBN has been found the cannabinoid that helps hit sleep a little bit harder than some of the other cannabinoids. Ultimate Sleep Formula is a combination that has some adaptogenic herbs, some nervine herbs in it that really kind of helps to kind of settle the brain down. Typically, we'll start with one at bedtime, do that for a few nights. If that's not working, go to two. If that's not working, go to three. Will I sometimes stack some of these? Yes, I will. We mentioned gut. We do have, I think, a webinar on gut itself. Again, I could have spent just an hour. I could spend all day long just talking about the gut. So don't mean to do it disservice, but yes, two of my top things there are probiotic spectrum. We have a lot of different probiotics. That's a very good broad spectrum. Also has some Saccharomyces boulardii in it. Typically, best time to dose that is at bedtime. Ultra GI Replenish is a great medical food meal replacement that has many different herbs in it and micronutrients, macronutrients to help support that gastrointestinal system. So a lot of times I'll do both of these. We'll do the Ultra GI Replenish, and we'll do even a modified elimination diet along with that for about 30 days, and then kind of reassess and see how you're feeling, see what changes we see, and then make some adjustments after that. Certainly lifestyle changes, increasing the veggies, the fruits, bringing more good fat on board. So things like avocado, coconut oil, right, almond oil, having the good fats, increasing the fiber, trying to limit the salt, the caffeine, the alcohol, limiting the white flour and sugar. Sugar increases inflammation, plain and simple, right? So we need to decrease that sugar in our diet. Cardio, we want the heart rate elevated for about 300 minutes a week, pulling in some weight bearing, having some stretching. As I mentioned already, 8 hours of straight sleep, breathing deep, doing it often, doing something relaxing every day, 20 minutes of relaxation a day. So for our webinar special today, we are running a sale on, we've got some short dated 450. This is a very specific strength as well as flavors. The Boxley's 450. We have some more of the lemon and sweet mint. Those are buy one, get one free. Can you mix and match? You want to do one lemon, one sweet mint? Absolutely fine. As well as the South River hemp CBD oil. This is a full spectrum. So that does have up to 0.3% THC. There again, it's not enough to get you higher stoned. This particular one is a broad spectrum. So no, absolutely none of the THC in it. Okay. And this one is a buy one, get one, or buy two and get three right now. While we've got supplies on those left. So what's next? How do I get started? What do I do? Certainly starting on the baseline supplements. That's something there again, all of us can do. Getting on the multi, having some fish oil, vitamin D, the CBD on board. That's a baseline for all of us. It's just, will we go a little bit higher? If it's 1 to 2 a day and we've got having issues, then definitely we want to gravitate towards 2. If we're having issues, we want to go to the higher dose on the fish oil, cranking up on that CBD, right? So pulling that on board, looking at the neurotransmitters, seeing where those are. If there's a lot of stress, anxiety, can also add kind of sleep issues on board, then yeah, let's look at cortisol. And then a lot of stress. I also want to look at the DHEA too. So looking at that, what we call the neuroadrenal panel. Once that comes back, certainly we'd want to get together, have a consultation, go over those numbers, see where those are, put together a game plan. Again, typically how we address it is not, well, let's put you on this medication for that and that medication for this. It's using the amino acids, using the adaptogenics to help balance the system and get those neurotransmitters back to where they need to be while supporting the adrenal glands. Typically, the consults right now are either phone, WebEx, Zoom. We are still doing a few in person. Certainly, you do need to be fully vaccinated, but right now with the Delta going up, really our preference is, as you can see with Zoom, everybody's doing Zoom right now. You can see I can make notes for you. I can share my screen, and it can be quite effective via WebEx or Zoom. So questions, if you have any questions, if you want to type those into the chat box, you should have a toolbar somewhere that if your chat box isn't up, you can click the chat feature and it'll pop a little box up that you can type in some questions. So while I'm doing that, I'll just remind you, if you haven't signed up for our email newsletter, do that. Follow us on all the different social media channels. We're out there. We do put different things on the different channels, as well as you can go to our YouTube and see a whole host of different webinars. Here's in your slides, we did include kind of some hot links on some of the ones that we've done recently. Certainly COVID, CBD, thyroid, men's health, women's health. We've got inflammation. We've got gut health out there as well. If you don't see one that you think that I mentioned, that give us a call. Sometimes we've got some kind of behind the scenes that we've got to send you a link for. And certainly, if you enjoyed today's presentation, take the time, if you don't mind, give us a review. That'd be fantastic. So a question that we've got is, what if I'm on medication now? Do I necessarily go off of the medication prior to the neurotransmitter testing? We're not going to pull you off, for weeks on end to get those levels. I think some of the things we'll pull off a day or so prior to the test. Some of the adaptogenics, if you're on herbals, sometimes we'll pull some of those off a few days prior. If you're a very fragile patient to where, man, I can't miss a single dose, then the answer for that is typically we'll keep you on it, and just I need to know so that I can back that into the equation so we can back it into the levels that we're seeing. And then once we get the numbers back, a lot of people will ask, well, do we add this amino acid or do this herbal in the place of this medication? No, I just don't pull you off of this drug and trade this herbal or amino acid for that drug. Most people have some stability with where they're at. Most of the folks I see aren't perfect. They aren't where they want to be. So we'll leave the medication where it's at, add to it, adjust, go a certain amount of time, reassess, and then make adjustments. Once we get you to where you want to be, then we'll work with you and your practitioner and slowly work on tapering the meds, if that makes sense at that time. Any other questions this afternoon? And I think next week, next Thursday at noon is our webinar on stress. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, you can go to our website and do that. I know Eric will be sending out an email on that soon, as well as that'll be hitting our social media channels as far as how to do that. So if the stress piece kind of piqued your interest and you're kind of burning that candle, then definitely tune in next Thursday at noon. and we'll be reviewing things that we can do to help with stress and anxiety. So I don't see any other questions coming in this afternoon. So with that, I will bid everybody a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for attending today.